Hello everyone, this is a chill stream. I'm just feeling bored. I just want to have a chat with, just discuss some things and also kick the AI's butt in this game. This game that a lot of people are having so much trouble with. People have gone to my guaranteed strategies video and yet they claim they have too much trouble with it and then they request my help, this and that. Oh, I don't see why people are having trouble with this. Because I have not had a single trouble with the AI whatsoever. But that's not what this is about. I'm bored. Let's chat. And also watch me kick the AI's butt. So, E3 2019. Anyone go and see it? Because nothing really interesting happened at E3. All because Sony didn't really appear. I heard Microsoft's E3 conference was absolutely boring, and nothing special really happened. But that's expected. There's a reason why I'm a Sony guy. One, because I like their console. Two, because I like their games. And three, because... well, there's no third option. It's just those two things. The games that Sony has are far above what Microsoft has, for sure. Because nothing Microsoft has is really intriguing. All they have is just Halo and other things. That's all I really think of when I think of Microsoft, just a average first-person game. A lot of people will just agree with me on this. Microsoft doesn't really have the most interesting coverage of games by far. Like, I even saw someone... I saw someone even make a video saying that Sony somehow won E3 without having to appear. And I can definitely say that is a true thing. Indeed. And also, did I mess this up?
Would you look at that?
Hold on a second, I wasn't paying attention, I must have messed up. My fault. Was not paying attention. So I lost 100, but who cares? Yeah, so on the topic of Sony and potential games I might be streaming in the future. Last of Us Part 2, cannot wait for that game. I'm so excited for it. I mean, there's been so much discussion over the release date of The Last of Us Part 2. There's been talk about it being in early 2019, and then there's talk about it being in late 2020. Well, I can say, though, is that I know for sure it is going to be a great game when it comes out. Because Naughty Dog just has a gift for making great games. I mean, I can't really say the same for Uncharted, though, but I think when it comes to survival horror, The Last of Us is definitely one of the best survival horror games I've ever played, because it definitely captures that sense to survival horror. And it's also one of the few survival horror games that can actually make a good story. You know, there's actual thought, and there's actual bonds between the characters and the storyline and the events that take place. It all feels so powerful, and I really like it. You know, and not only that, but the gameplay, like, people don't understand how much of an impact gameplay has on a game. And The Last of Us's gameplay is absolutely phenomenal. I really love it. Because it takes influences from Resident Evil 4. You know, the shooting feels amazing. The guns feel so devastating when you use them. And it's particularly on grounded difficulty, and in its highest difficulty is so interesting. The fact that the enemy's damage is increased, but your damage is increased, so your weapons are even stronger. And it's so cool. I don't see a lot of games doing stuff like that for harder difficulties. But I just wonder what they'll bring to the table with The Last of Us Part 2 to actually improve the gameplay. I mean, there were some problems with the first Last of Us's gameplay, but wasn't anything too big. Although the AI on The Last of Us Part 1 was not very good in a lot of areas. Because they often did very strange things, and oftentimes Ellie would get in my way, but not too much, I would say. Uh, that's really that. And, I mean, other problems that definitely occur would be, with... I honestly can't think of any other problem aside from AI issues. That's really it, you know? Like, I think The Last of Us is really was really on the path to being an almost perfect game, much like Resident Evil 4 was, because Resident Evil 4 is almost 95% perfect, but then it has some really annoying niggles in the system, particularly with stuff like Ashley, for instance. Because Ashley, the only times you're gonna have trouble with Ashley in Resident Evil 4 are when the enemies are in higher numbers, and then they constantly stop Ashley from moving because Ashley does this stupid cowering animation that she does even when an enemy is knocked out. Can you believe that? The amount of times that has screwed me is so stupid, and I wish it was refined better. When an enemy is knocked down on the ground, not Ellie, Ashley should not crouch. It's so frustrating. It's one of the most annoying issues with Resident Evil 4. But going back to the Last of Us Part 2, some of the new systems they added to The Last of Us Part 2 are really interesting. They've put an emphasis on a system called analog stealth, where essentially when you're in bushes, there's this circle that's filled up and or narrows, depending on how concealed you are. Oh, by the way, I just kicked the AI's butt. See ya. I'll just keep doing this until I decide to end the stream. Like, apparently, they've introduced the ability to jump in The Last of Us Part 2. And you couldn't jump in The Last of Us Part 1. You can only do it off of ledges. But the jump still then was very weird. It was the most effeminate jump ever, which doesn't make any sense. And I honestly question why it was made like that, because there's really no point in using such a mechanic in The Last of Us Part 1. But in The Last of Us Part 2, because of the fact that they've added a jump, it means they're gonna put a lot of emphasis on the environments now. People don't really understand the kind of things, small things like that have on the gameplay. It's why I talk a lot about Resident Evil 3 and why it's my favorite game of the older Resident Evil games. Because the kind of things it introduced helped strengthen the game's lethality of the enemies and made it a really competent survival horror game that was actually scary. I think Resident Evil 3 is the scariest Resident Evil game. I think it had some really intimidating moments, and it didn't feel so goofy compared to Resident Evil 2. I thought Resident Evil 2 was a very goofy game. But people call it the best Resident Evil game, and I don't know why. If anything, like, its enemy types are just bullcrap. That's all I'll say. Oftentimes the enemies on Resident Evil 2 like to cheat. Lots of the times. And there's not even a point in dealing with them, because all you're doing is just running through the game, because the game is just designed so much around knife only, this and that the enemies just don't demand much. But because of the fact that Resident Evil 3 added mechanics like the dodge, for instance, it meant that Capcom had to make the enemies less predictable. That's why they had to introduce new enemy behavior to the zombies. Like the turbo zombies, because the zombies in Resident Evil 3 have the ability to do this very fast running animation, and it just catches you off guard because you're not expecting it. It can do it so close to you as well, and it just catches you out, and you need mechanics like the dodge to balance that out, because imagine if that mechanic was in Resident Evil 2. Resident Evil 2 would be one of the most bullcrap games in the Resident Evil series. Same with like Resident Evil 1 and any other Resident Evil game that had turbo zombies. Heck, even Resident Evil 2 Remake would be a terrible game if it had that mechanic, because there's no system to accommodate for that. You can't even shoot the enemies in the legs to knock them over in Resident Evil 2 Remake. But I just feel like the enemy types in Resident Evil 3 are something to be respected. You know, you had the normal zombies that could go into turbo mode. You had dogs. I mean, the dogs were practically the same as they were in Resident Evil 2. But so the strategy still worked against them. But I'm just glad it works like that because the dogs are incredibly fair in those games because they actually flinch from the knife and from the pistol, and you can just stun lock them, and they're only dangerous in their higher numbers. Like one single enemy should not be dangerous. That's the whole point because it's like if this enemy type is already that dangerous, why the heck? I wonder how the bosses are going to be. The bosses are probably not going to be nothing compared to this single zombie. You know, just making it so that the normal enemy is is just dangerous for stupid reasons. You know, it's like how the heck are the characters still alive? You know, how is it that there's so many of this particular enemy type around? It doesn't make any sense. It's a normal zombie. It defies logic, and that's just my opinion when it comes to stuff like that. Yeah, but three had some really scary music, like the Gravedigger. The Gravedigger theme is probably one of the scariest themes ever. And then Is There a Way Out, which is the theme that plays after Jill escapes from the zombies the first time, and it plays during that cutscene. And like Nemesis's final transformation is one of the most intense fights ever. The music made you feel rather tense. Like this was your last escape. This is your last chance to get out of here, and this guy is in your way. Like that theme just gave me the chills. And Resident Evil 3 just earned it. Like I had a reason to feel intimidated because Resident Evil 3 can be a pretty challenging game. Even though people have managed to speedrun the game in under 50 minutes. And like its combat is pretty cool as well. I mean, the knife actually serves a purpose, which is awesome compared to Resident Evil 2, because the knife in Resident Evil 2 was absolutely useless. Like you can just tell like the game was not designed for like running through like just using the knife in general for combat, unless you're doing the bosses. Because the zombies had the ability to just grab you at a distance. And it was really, really frustrating when that stuff happened.
I am grateful for the contest.
It's just hard to believe that Resident Evil 3 introduced a lot of mechanics that I originally thought were in Resident Evil 1. Like the quick turn. I was honestly surprised when I first played Resident Evil 2. I'm like, where's the quick turn? And then I looked up something and it said that Resident Evil 3 was the one that introduced the quick turn. Like just adding things like just adding small things like the quick turn and the dodge, it caused the developers to try to put a lot more effort in making the enemy types more dangerous, because of course because they made you more capable, they had to make the enemies more capable as well. You know, that's why they added like RNG factors to spawns and into items, and the enemies were significantly faster in Resident Evil 3. And then they added the pursuer type enemy, which is Nemesis. Even though Nemesis was pretty easy to cheese. Although in the developer discussion that Carcinogen SDA had with Ayuma-san, Ayuma-san was aware of a lot of the issues involving Nemesis, but he left them in there because it would be fun for the player. It would be fun for the player if they were to discover such things. Very interesting decision. It's a cool idea. It's always like for instance, when I even heard about this with Super Meat Boy, like people who managed to find those strategies in Super Meat Boy that allow them to break the game. The game developers of Super Meat Boy actually watched those videos and were honestly impressed. They didn't want to change the game at all because I mean they said those players earned it for being as clever as they were when it came to discovering a lot of the systems. And you gotta respect that in a game developer when when they just when they just respect when players find these kind of things. Also, I just realized I just made a mistake.
One for me.
I made a mistake in the strategy for dealing with this particular permutation. Although in all honesty, it actually doesn't matter because I can just do this and it's just gonna bait him out. So yeah, slight deviation from my normal strategy for this particular permutation, but nothing too big.
Oh well.
I'm just focused right now. I will beat this guy. This guy's thinking, isn't he?
Nice
Alright, this
play.
guy's just wasted a turn, and he's screwed. Anyway, I've already beaten the AI. So, back to what I was saying. Resident Evil 3 is an impressive game. I like it a lot. It's my favorite of the older Resident Evil games because its enemies are lethal, they're fast, they actually demand a lot, and it's a very scary Resident Evil game compared to Resident Evil 2. I think Resident Evil 2 is just overrated, in all honesty. I mean, it has some cool ideas. I even discovered that you can even counter lickers with a knife if you hit them during their jump attack, which I didn't actually realize Resident Evil 2 had. That's actually a mechanic of Resident Evil 1 as well, so I wasn't aware that mechanic existed in the older Resident Evil games. I thought Resident Evil 4 introduced that mechanic, but it's been around longer than I thought. Which is another reason I gotta respect the older Resident Evil games.
Now we're talking.
They've, Resident Evil just feels so ahead of its time. But now that they've just gone to an average model with Resident Evil 2 Remake, where it just has absolutely nothing impressive to it, I'm just sorely disappointed.
Victory is sweet.
I mean, I like Resident Evil 2 Remake, but not so much as a Resident Evil game. It's just a fun game, but as a Resident Evil game, I just don't know if it's up to par. Because I mean, I've done so many live streams of Resident Evil 2 Remake, and posted so many strategy videos, and I've already figured out the game in the very first week of playing it. Whereas in the other Resident Evil games, I'm still learning new things. Like, I'm still learning new stuff for Resident Evil 5. I'm still learning new things with Resident Evil 6. I'm even learning new things with Resident Evil 7, for instance, when it comes to its DLCs or certain strategies in the main game. But Resident Evil 2 Remake, I've just learned the entirety of the game in just 1 week. That's it. And I mean, like, every so often, I just choose to update my previous strategies, but it's not really that different. Like, I question where Resident Evil 3 Remake will go. I hope it still maintains a lot of the the charm that the original Resident Evil 3 had. And I just hope it has a lot of the mentality that that Resident Evil 3 had originally. But if they treat Resident Evil 3 remake like they did with Resident Evil 2 remake, then I don't think it's going to be as impressive of a game. Because I mean, Capcom just played it safe. They didn't go all out like they normally do with the Resident Evil games. Like they went more all out with Resident Evil 3 than they did with Resident Evil 2 remake. Like they were willing to take risks with Resident Evil 3. But they didn't take any sort of risk whatsoever with Resident Evil 2 Remake. The only thing that they took a risk for was the over-the-shoulder perspective, because they knew it was going to make a lot of people mad, because people judge the Resident Evil games based on stupid things like camera perspective. You know, the fixed camera is the dumbest camera perspective ever, because it was so awkwardly done in the older Resident Evil games. The amount of times the game would freeze when it would transition between the camera angles. The amount of times I get screwed by those stupid camera angles when I'm trying to do a strategy, and the camera just flips, and I take unnecessary damage, and it affects my movement. So stupid. Like, I'm glad they opted for the over-the-shoulder perspective, because Resident Evil practically founded that camera perspective. Like, Resident Evil 4 is the very first game ever to utilize the over-the-shoulder perspective. The fact that like Resident Evil 4 influenced not only Resident Evil but also other countless titles as well. Like that's what that says in the official PlayStation Store page for Resident Evil 4 Remastered. It says it not only influenced Resident Evil, but it also influenced other countless titles as well. But for some reason, Capcom's not embracing that. It's like they're just looking a gift horse in the mouth. They're not trying to build off of what Resident Evil 4 established. Like Resident Evil 7 has Resident Evil 4 mentality to it, and also Resident Evil 3 mentality when it comes to its mechanics. Like Resident Evil 7 has more going for it than Resident Evil 2 remake. Yet people are constantly saying that Resident Evil 7 is a crap game because they judge it based on the stupidest aspects. Like, come on, Resident Evil 7 is not as simple as Resident Evil 2 Remake in its design. And I had said before in my Resident Evil Revelations Infernal Difficulty handgun/grenade only run that I might potentially do a comparison video between Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil 2 Remake, and primarily focus on content and gameplay and diversity and risk taking. But I didn't want it to be like those average comparison videos that people make, where they look at some of the most unimportant aspects like graphics and story, and then when they get into the gameplay, it's just not as detailed at all. And I want to try to avoid that, because I don't want to fall into the same pitfalls like those average comparison videos do. And like the amount of people that perceive this as whining. Like I even know someone who complains about me that I'm doing like constructive whining, as he calls it. But he clearly doesn't even understand what whining is. This is constructive feedback. This is objective feedback, for crying out loud. Like whining is just it's like when DSP is whining, when he's whining about the game instead of learning about it, or when people are complaining or for instance like people when they complain about Sheva but they're not using her properly in Resident Evil 5. When they're not using the AI in Resident Evil 5 properly, and then they're saying, oh, Resident Evil 6 AI and Resident Evil Revelations AI is significantly better. But your AI partners in Resident Evil 6 and Resident Evil Revelations barely do anything. They're only useful in certain scenarios, not like for the whole game. Like, Sheva has been so reliable to me for the entirety of Resident Evil 5 that I just need her to help me out. And I have countless live streams to prove it. But no, people just want to stick to their roots and pride, because they're prideful individuals saying, "Oh, I'm right, you're wrong. Resident Evil 5 AI is absolute garbage." That's exactly what Seraphim 17 was like when he complained about me being delusional, and that he's therefore better at Resident Evil 5 because he's played longer than I have. Like, seriously?
I've come
Oh, hey, what's up, Lightning? Welcome to the chat. But as I was talking about with Seraphim 17, like I just have to talk about it again because it's the most hilarious thing I have ever heard from him. Because the way he arrogantly claimed that he was better at Resident Evil 5 than I was so bizarre.
Now it's
Saying that he's played it longer, but his playstyle it does not back that claim up at all when it comes to his walkthrough. His walkthrough of Resident Evil 5 is dog crap. That's all I'll say. I love the guy. I think when he makes walkthroughs of games that are not Resident Evil, I think he's really great. He's really great. But when he makes walkthroughs of Resident Evil games, he's not very great. At all. He's not very competent at all. His Resident Evil 5 and Resident Evil 6 walkthroughs are absolute garbage, and it's definitely understandable why he says the things about Resident Evil 5 and 6 when he's making all these complaints. Because he just doesn't know how to play them. He just doesn't know how to play them effectively. He keeps trying to play like Resident Evil 4 instead of doing it. Who's this guy? Oh, he's a constructive walkthrough maker. He's definitely the best when it comes to making walkthroughs because he's very informative. But that's really when it's only applied to games that are not Resident Evil. But like but it's not just Resident Evil as well. Like his Evil Within walkthroughs. I mean, his Evil Within 2 walkthrough was pretty competent, but his Evil Within 1 walkthrough on the Kumu difficulty, not as good. Not as good, unfortunately. Because he was using very outdated strategies, and I unfortunately made the mistake of following that walkthrough because that was actually the very first time I've actually seen Seraphim 17. That was the very first time I actually saw him when I was watching his Evil Within walkthrough, and I originally thought his walkthrough was golden, and because I didn't understand how to look at games properly back then. But
should have seen that coming.
as much as I do hate Seraphim 17 and the way he judges Resident Evil because of his crappy playstyle, you know, he's kind of like a mentor in some respects because he's the guy who changed my perspective of games indirectly. And I've just developed my own mentality of how to judge games, and I just gotta respect that of him because he allowed that to happen without even trying. So therefore, I've almost become this alternative version of Chris, but just better at judging games. I see, but I didn't understand his name. Yeah, Seraphim 17. That's his YouTube name. And then still on the topic of him, like when I asked him why he didn't put a no store restriction on his Resident Evil 5 professional difficulty walkthrough, he said it was because barely anyone's going to play in that playstyle. But so like why would I ever do a restricted run of that? But he's done so many other restricted runs of other games. Like he did his Evil Within Akumu difficulty walkthrough without upgrades. And that's what made me do nothing but Evil Within Akumu difficulty without upgrades. And as I already mentioned before in my Resident Evil Revelations handgun/grenade only run, if you play a game on its lowest setting, on its lowest possible common denominator, you're showing that the game can be done on a normal run. If it can be done on a restricted run, then therefore it can be done on a normal run. Like when I did Resident Evil Revelations 2 on handgun only, and I found like several new strategies, and then I returned to just playing the game normally, I didn't care so much about my ammunition. You know, like I was using a lot more of my other weapons in greater areas, in more areas because I did my handgun only run, and because of the fact that I did that restricted setting, I've gained a lot more confidence in myself, and therefore I committed to a lot of the strategies I use in when I'm just playing through Resident Evil Revelations 2 normally. It's the same with other games as well. When I do these restricted runs on Resident Evil 5 and Resident Evil 6, and also Resident Evil 7, I gain so much confidence that I can, in actually doing the game normally, that it just that's just the point of a walkthrough. That's why I make such walkthroughs with such restrictions, because it helps give you confidence. And then it just allows you to view the games differently. Like when people are saying, "Oh, this section's bullcrap," like what the heck am I supposed to do about this?
I'll take it.
You come to realize that these sections aren't bullcrap. There is design to this. It's like that. It's like that room, like that very first room in Chapter 6 of Akumu difficulty on the Evil Within 1, where it's those two rooms and there's no checkpoint in between. You learn to approach those sections differently because that's a section that punishes people for trying to kill all the enemies. Because if you kill all the enemies, all you're doing is just spawning in more enemies, and it's just making it easier for the enemies to kill you. But then you realize that if you kill only a certain amount of enemies and only leave a few enemies standing, you're not going to have any trouble with it. Because that's the clever design of Shinji Mikami, and that's another reason why I just like him as a developer, because he's so clever with these subtle touches to his design that he knows how to punish bad players. He's very, very clever when it comes to stuff like that. And his Evil Within Akumu difficulty, like when he made Akumu difficulty, he clearly had a lot of thought to it. You know, if Shinji Mikami was back in directing Resident Evil, I don't think he would have allowed Resident Evil 2 Remake to exist in the simple state that it is. Because Resident Evil 2 Remake is too simplistic. It's about as simplistic as Call of Duty, because it doesn't do enough. It feels too average. Like it feels no different to like Uncharted level design. Because Uncharted is a rather simple game as well.
Would you look at that?
Also, I've just realized I made a mistake in the strategy again, but that's not that much of an issue. And he's done for.
Thank you. I hope we play again soon.
But where is Resident Evil going to go at this point? Like, Resident Evil 2 Remake is something that a lot of people wanted, apparently. And people are all like, oh, Capcom's back, this and that, it's no longer Capcom. But if you ask me... So he's Seraphim 17, yeah. Yeah, that's his name. Like, people are constantly saying Resident Evil 2 Remake is the return to the series' roots, but if you ask me, it feels less like its roots at all, because it doesn't have the same mechanical roots that it's known for. They've just played it too safe with Resident Evil 2 Remake. Played it way too safe that it just doesn't have that same level of creativity. He's just a Let's Player? No, he's a walkthrough maker. But I will say, when he did his walkthrough of Resident Evil 5 and Resident Evil 6, it felt too much like a playthrough, more so than a walkthrough. Oh, shoot, I wasn't paying attention. I messed up. Compared to the level I usually watch. Yeah, well, I mean, he's a guy that's very, very... But I like the way he does his walkthroughs when he commentates. You know, he not only focuses on the game itself, but then he goes off on tangents as well. I mean, while that does cause him to miss out on a lot of key details in a game, you know, it's always fun to have that level of commentary when he's as informative as he is, and I've definitely I've definitely followed suit. But as I was saying, like, where is Resident Evil going to go at this point? Now that people have considered Resident Evil 2 Remake the game that everyone's always wanted. Because if Resident Evil 3 Remake is going to be like Resident Evil 2 Remake, then it's just not going to be as impressive as the original Resident Evil 3. And then with Resident Evil 8, like, what are they going to do with Resident Evil 8? You know, if the series had stayed where Resident Evil 7 was, I think it would have been absolutely impressive, because Resident Evil 7 is Capcom taking risks. Capcom took more risks with Resident Evil 7 than with any other Resident Evil game. Except for Resident Evil 4. But I feel like Resident Evil 4... No, actually, yeah. I feel like Resident Evil 7 took just about as many risks as Resident Evil 4. And that's what made it so impressive. But then Resident Evil 2 Remake comes out, and it's just not as interesting. Like, even the content, like, even without me discussing the gameplay, the content of Resident Evil 2 Remake is so lackluster compared to Resident Evil 7. I mean, look at all the DLCs of Resident Evil 7. You had another hero DLC. Like, or before I even get into that, like, look at the gameplay of Resident Evil 7. It's simple but complex.
Nice move.
But then you have the Not a Hero DLC, which reintroduced the action aspect back into the game, and they made so many improvements to Resident Evil 4 system. Look at the End of Zoe DLC. You were playing you were doing like boxing and not using all guns, this and that, because you had only your fists and craftables to your advantage. That was all you had. And it was a pretty challenging DLC to do no damage. I still haven't no damage this DLC to this day. I've done a no healing, no save run, but not a no damage run because it's so difficult. Because some of the sections, it can be really punishing, and then Jack is so clever in his design because he's so good at fainting you out. And then you look at the banned footage DLC. You had the Night Terror DLC, which was a round-based system. It was a change to the gameplay style because they were trying to bring back something equivalent to Mercenaries and Raid mode. Look at the Bedroom DLC. It was a puzzle-solving DLC because it was trying to bring back the roots of puzzle solving that Resident Evil's known for. And then look at the 21 DLC, a card game, another change to the gameplay style. End of Zoe. It was not so much of a I'm sorry, not End of Zoe. The Daughters DLC. It was not so much of a gameplay style change, but more so a change to storytelling. Like so many different changes. But Resident Evil 2 Remake, what does that have for DLC? Fort Survivor DLC. You're just going from point A to point B, just trying to figure out the enemy patterns, this and that, because the enemy patterns are always the same. Tofu Survivor, exactly the same thing as Fort Survivor, only you're playing as a different character. And then Ghost Survivors, it's just the same thing as Fort Survivor, but with a different aesthetic to it. Like, it's so lazy. It's really lazy. He's like Mike Betancourt? Oh, I've heard of Mike Betancourt. Mike Betancourt is pretty interesting. I watched his Umbrella Chronicles videos. I think he did no damage runs of the Chronicles games. But anyway, back to what I was saying. I don't see Resident Evil 2 Remake as a return to the series at all. I think Capcom just became became almost half Crapcom, half Capcom, like that level. I'm sad to say this, but that's just how I feel about Resident Evil 2 Remake. It's just not as impressive as all the other Resident Evil games on the planet. Because it doesn't do anything above average. It's so disappointing. I've elaborated on this so many times, but that's just how I feel. Like, this is all coming into a nice bow and ribbon at this point with my thoughts on Resident Evil 2 Remake.
Thank you for the game.
But enough about my constructive criticism on Resident Evil 2 Remake and the future Resident Evil. Let's change the topic to what I'll be doing in the future on this channel. Also, I gotta say, I want to give thanks to several subscribers of mine for making a lot of my videos very interesting and doing all these very impressive runs. I want to give a thanks to Lightning Fidelis, because Lightning Fidelis is the guy that served as the final catalyst for my transformation into an amazing Resident Evil player. I'd like to thank Ellen, because Ellen is definitely one to argue with. Lots of interesting arguments to get into.
All right, now we're talking.
I want to thank Crossrage for the performance she gave me on Chris' campaign of Resident Evil 6. I want to thank Subbed for the conversations I got with her. I want to thank Dragon Belmont for his enthusiasm and such. You know, I want to thank Pakal6754 as well, because we got into some very interesting chats as well. You know, I'd like to thank a lot of people, because this channel wouldn't be the same without you guys. Because, you know, like, that's just the thing human beings live for. Like, human beings live for conversation, this and that. A conversation of any kind, you know, friendly conversations, arguments, and stuff like that.
I'll take it.
And that's just how I am when it comes to gaming. You know, I'm not as socially active in real life. I'm more socially active when it comes to this particular medium because there's just so much to talk about. You're forgetting the best one? Who am I forgetting, Lightning Fidelis? Oh yeah, I'd like to thank Jack Doyle. Jack Doyle has been taking a lot of influences from my walkthrough, and can't wait for this continuation of his pistol only run of Resident Evil 5 on solo because it looks pretty interesting. And and I'd like to thank Fastinator as well. I almost forgot about Fastinator because Fastinator has been so clever with a lot of the strategies he's discovered. The guy's a genius. Fastinator is an absolute genius when it comes to Resident Evil 5 and 6. I mean, I was already well experienced with Resident Evil 5 and 6, but when he just told me a lot of the things about Resident Evil 5 and 6, like Resident Evil 5, you could get ammo from Josh in chapter 3, which is something I didn't know about. And then Fascinator also introduced a hidden system to the AI in Resident Evil 6 where you can initiate combos. Like if you mark an enemy, and then you stun them, your AI partner will go in and try to participate in the combo, and then they'll even call you out saying do this attack now. It's really cool. Maybe I'll do an M92F only run on professional difficulty on solo,
Would you look at that?
like Jack Doyle is doing. Fascinator is definitely a professor, but the ammo request with Josh is an old thing. Oh, did you know about it, Lightning? I didn't see you use it in I didn't see you use it when you were playing with Mr. Death. I thought you didn't know about that.
All right, now we're talking.
But I was honestly surprised that actually works. Where Josh can actually give you ammo. How cool is that? You know, why did they remove a lot of the co-op aspects that Resident Evil 5 introduced in Resident Evil 6? Like they took away the ability to give ammo to other players, but the reason for that is because of the way the looting works. Because it's not a shared inventory system. It's like each player gets their own inventory system. Of course, I think I used it in my very old handgun only walkthrough. Oh, I don't remember it. Maybe you did. I'm not sure.
Fortune is with me today.
So on to another topic. What else should I talk about? Let's talk about I mean, I was originally on the topic of E3, but I kind of strayed off from that. Oh yeah, I should definitely talk about Shinji Mikami's E3 reveal. There's a new game that Shinji Mikami's releasing. It's called Ghostwire Tokyo. And I'm definitely going to try it out. I'm going to definitely do a blind playthrough of it. Because Shinji Mikami makes some really good games. You know, Resident Evil and Evil Within. Easily the best survival horror games I've ever played. Not only for survival horror, but also for mechanics. Far ahead of their time. But Ghostwire Tokyo is apparently an action-adventure game, but with some spooky elements to it, but it's not a survival horror game. I kind of wish it was a survival horror game. It kind of sounds like a survival horror game. Oh, by the way, you forgot. Oh yeah, I forgot Mustafa. Although to be honest though, Mustafa's not so bad as long as he's not talking about hairless cats and such. He's better than Stranger 21 for sure. Stranger 21 can be really annoying when he's just trolling me and such. And like the only time Stranger 21 ever comes to my live streams is when he's trying to berate me about a mistake I made. Like at least I got into some very interesting discussions with Mustafa. But I mean, I respect Mustafa more as an audience member, more so than as a gamer. I think when he's an audience member, we get into some really fun discussions. And, you know, he kind of has the same. He kind of has very similar mentalities to me. Everyone changes Mustafa too. Yeah,
Take it.
yeah, exactly. I think like Mustafa definitely changes. Like I said, I just like him as an audience member when he's not talking about hairless cats and stuff. I think he's actually getting into these discussions with me. Like I still like look back at my Leon B run, and I just look at the conversations I was having with him. And the kind of stuff we were talking about with Resident Evil 7, and then our hatred for the Ghost Survivors DLC. Like those were some really fun discussions. But as I was talking about with Ghostwire Tokyo, it's a new IP. It's an action adventure game that Shinji Mikami's making with some spooky elements to it. There's been no information about the kind of gameplay style they're going for. Although I hope it's kind of like a third person game. I hope it's not too much like a fighting game because I'm not the type for fighting games. I don't find them as interesting as third person shooters or survival horror games. Are you planning to continue your Evil Within 2 run? Yeah, I will. I'm just like caught up on other things right now. You know, because I'm taking summer school. It's my choice because I want to actually you know, get more credits in school.
Would you look
Plus, I'm enjoying the classes I'm taking. So I'm having to focus on studying for stuff. In fact, one of my midterms for my classes is coming up, so I got to be prepared for that.
That does not make things easier.
Yeah, but yeah, I'm gonna eventually do a restricted run of the Evil Within series. I had previously done a handgun only montage of the Evil Within 1 on Akumu difficulty, but it was only a montage. It wasn't an actual playthrough. A good challenge would be getting as less deaths as possible. I mean, yeah, that could be pretty cool. I mean, the strategies I've definitely used for the first Evil Within are definitely helpful. But getting less deaths, that's gonna be pretty tricky. Although, I mean, all I do is just pretty much restart the checkpoint.
I
Because
am grateful for
because if you restart the checkpoint, it just negates the death. But I'll definitely do pistol only on the first Evil Within and also the second Evil Within now that it actually has an Akumu difficulty. I do hate how they've locked Akumu difficulty behind the Bethesda account in the second Evil Within. Oh, you'll definitely do it? Oh, that's gonna be cool. I think I can't wait for that when you do Evil Within. I'll definitely look forward to that. And what did I do? Oh, I wasn't paying attention again. I messed up. Oh, in a live stream? You sure about that? Oh, hey, what's up, Bad Karma? But yeah, Ghostwire Tokyo, I'm definitely looking forward to it. Even though I hope they release a gameplay trailer at some point because I want to see what the gameplay style is like. Because Shinji Mikami does better at third-person shooters and survival horror games more so than I would feel an action-adventure game. Even though, as Seraphim 17 has stated, that God Hand, which is a fighting game, is honestly the hardest game he's ever played. And it's so intuitive with its combat systems, and it's a game made by Shinji Mikami. I mean, I can't play God Hand, of course, because I don't have it, because it's a very old game. It looks pretty interesting. Now, what else? What else should I talk about?
Oh well.
Any other new games from E3 that I'm looking forward to? Aside from The Last of Us Part 2 and Ghostwire Tokyo. Not that I'm aware of, because lots of the games they introduced weren't really that interesting. I'm sure something will come to mind. I just can't remember what games that were actually shown at E3 or games that were actually announced. It'll come to me. I'll probably have to think of something else to talk about. So, cool thing. I was able to get my PS2 installed in my gaming area, so now I can actually play Resident Evil Dead Aim. I of course can't record it because I can only record using the PS4's share system, because I don't want to have to waste time just setting up a capture card, this and that, because it just sounds like a very convoluted process. Um, Resident Evil Dead Aim, just coming back to it, it's still a lot of fun. I really enjoy it. Its dodge system is definitely better than Resident Evil Revelations, for sure. Anything is better than Resident Evil Revelations dodge. It's definitely better than Resident Evil Revelations 2's dodge. Because the dodge in Resident Evil Revelations 2 is not that good. I mean, it can be augmented with skills, but I mean, the enemy types just punish you a lot. Sorry, I lost your last speech. Oh. No matter. Okay. So Dead Aim is I mean, Dead Aim Resident Evil Dead Aim can be completed in like 20 minutes to from like 20 minutes to 30 minutes, pretty much. It's a very short Resident Evil game if you know what you're doing. It does have some pretty douchey moments though. Like there's two enemy types in Resident Evil Resident Evil Dead Aim that are really annoying. One of them is called a Torpedo Kid, and then the other one is called a Glimmer. The Torpedo Kids in Resident Evil Dead Aim, what they do is there's a mother entity that spawns them endlessly, and the Torpedo Kids die in one hit, but you can't dodge them. The dodge doesn't work on that particular enemy type because it just doesn't allow it to happen. So you have to shoot them, and shooting them can be really annoying because they have this ability to turn so sharply as they're going through the water in the sewers and just jump you. So pretty much they're a mandatory enemy that you have to get hit by unless you shoot them. And there's only like one Torpedo Kid section that I don't like. It's the second Torpedo Kid you encounter. There's only two of them. There's only two mother entities in Resident Evil Dead Aim, and it's the second one that's very tricky because I mean you're on this direct path and it's directly in front of you and you have to go past the mother entity, but it just keeps spawning those stupid Torpedo Kids. And you have to be so accurate in your shots because it's kind of hard to hit them. And then the second enemy type that's really annoying in Resident Evil Dead Aim is the Glimmer. The Glimmer are these frog-like enemies that glow, that have eyes that glow. And they move so fast. They move at almost light speed because that's part of their intended design. And the dodge doesn't work on those enemies as well. They have the ability to grab you at a distance, and then they have the ability to spit vomit at you, or spit vomit. Sorry, they have the ability to vomit on you, and you can't dodge that either.
Nice move.
So like you have to take all these very sharp turns, this and that, because I think what the developers intend for you to do is take this one specific path to get past the Glimmers. Because the Glimmers seem to not be so active in trying to attack you so long as they're not on camera and you're taking all these very sharp turns. It almost reminds me of Resident Evil Code Veronica with the Tyrant on the plane. Because the Tyrant on the plane, if you ran at some weird angles, you can stop the Tyrant from doing his long range attacks, and therefore that's what allows you to do the circle strategy on him, where you just keep running in the circle until the cargo charges up. So that's the result of the way the game interprets the tank controls. But yeah, you have to deal with two rooms involving Glimmers, and the second room that has the Glimmers is one of the most annoying because there's so many Glimmers in that second room. and that's really the part that frustrates me. But the other thing that frustrates me about Resident Evil Dead Aim is the final boss. The final boss is not even a fight. It's a gimmick fight pretty much because you have to keep shooting Morpheus, who's the final boss of Resident Evil Dead Aim, who's just become this something equivalent to Birkin's final form from Resident Evil 2.
Nice play.
But you have to basically shoot this head that comes out of him. And it's so hard to do so because the head keeps moving all over the place, and the hit stun is so inconsistent because when you deal enough damage to his head, he's supposed to move backwards. But at times he just doesn't move backwards because the hit stun is so inconsistent. And that was one of the most frustrating boss fights ever. I found it much harder than Code Veronica's final boss. I think Code Veronica's final boss is not even as hard as Resident Evil Dead Aim's final boss. Because at least with Code Veronica's final boss, as long as you stood in one corner and you kept firing your bolt gun with the explosive rounds, you didn't have so much trouble with it. You could therefore deal with the boss. You can deal with the little maggot she spawns, and it's very simple. But Dead Aim's final boss, if you don't have enough ammo for that final boss, you're screwed. Because Resident Evil Dead Aim, if you don't have all the weapons, you're gonna get screwed. Even though I was able to do the final boss of Resident Evil Dead Aim using only the handgun and assault rifle. And I only ever used the assault rifle for the final boss because if you're just going around and trying to kill like some of the enemies in Resident Evil Dead Aim, you're playing the game wrong. You're completely playing the game wrong. Like Resident Evil Dead Aim is a game designed for running past the enemies. That's why its dodge is so good, because it's needed because the enemy types can be really annoying to run past. But on the topic of mechanics with Resident Evil Dead Aim, its mechanics are almost pre-Resident Evil 4. It almost feels like Resident Evil Dead Aim introduced some of the mechanics in Resident Evil 4. And it has a lot of the mechanics from the older Resident Evil games as well, like shooting enemies out of the air. Like, that's why the hunters are so fair. The hunters on Resident Evil Dead Aim are so fast, and the dodge works really well on them. But you can also shoot them out of the air, because if you get caught with your pants down when it comes to hunters, they are very damaging, and on hard difficulty, they kill you in like 2 hits. They're very lethal, far lethal than any of the other hunters I've ever come across in the Resident Evil games. They're not as douchey as Resident Evil Zero's hunters. I've already mentioned this before, but Resident Evil Zero is a very controversial Resident Evil game in my opinion. It's so flawed in its mechanics. The mechanics that originally worked in Resident Evil 1 don't work in Resident Evil Zero. That's why the hunters are so broken in Resident Evil Zero, and a lot of the enemy types are very broken. Particularly with hit stun. Because the hunters have this gift for not even flinching from high-powered weapons like the shotgun and the grenade launcher. I mean, the Magnum kills them instantly, but you only ever get the Magnum later on in the game. Like, some of the earlier sections involving hunters, it's almost luck-based. But, like, the only other ammo type that works against hunters in Resident Evil Zero is acid rounds. Acid rounds are really good against hunters, but you don't get a lot of acid rounds in Resident Evil Zero, and then at times when you do get the acid rounds, there's no point in even trying to deal with any hunters, because there's barely any hunters to deal with. But on Leech Hunter mode, when you're fighting like so many hunters, those hunters are so douchey. Especially when you're trying to go for the trophy to kill all the enemies in Leech Hunter. Because with the amount of hunters there are, it means you're going to get screwed a lot by bullcrap with the hunters. Because, like I said, they just don't flinch. The hit stun on them is so inconsistent. At times, you'll get them on the very first shot and just shoot them out of the air perfectly because they spam jump attack a lot more Oh, I just made a mistake. My fault. Oh my god, I did it wrong again. My god. Now I'm just not thinking because I'm too focused on the conversations and less so on the game I'm playing. Hunters just don't flinch properly at all in Resident Evil 0. They cheat all the time, and they spam jump attack way more frequently compared to Resident Evil 1. Yeah. Like, Resident Evil 0 in general has some really dumb enemy types, like the Leech Man. Leech Man is one of the most broken enemies on Resident Evil 0, and because its hitboxes are so broken,
One for me.
it can literally do damage to you before an attack has even touched you. It's really dumb. And then, but I mean, I did find a way to kill the Leechmen using only the knife because their grab is actually the grab attack that they do has one of the fairest detections ever because it's grab that only works on the first frame. Every other frame afterwards in the grab animation it doesn't work, so it makes them very fair. If you can replicate that strategy, and at least Leechmen die very fast from Molotovs because that's just how a weakness works because Leechmen are weak to fire. And that's why the game gives you a lot of Molotov cocktails to craft. To be fair, though, because of the fact that Resident Evil 0 is impossible to do knife only, it means like the weapon types. It means the weapons actually have a purpose. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying it's bad to do knife only runs because they can be really fun, but it can only really be fun if the mechanics are actually demanding. If the mechanics have a lot of complexity to it, if the enemy types demand a lot more than just simply demand a lot more and just using all the mechanics you can in order for the knife only runs to work. But yeah, I had mentioned previously that ammunition in the Resident Evil games is almost an illusion because the game gives you this impression that you're running low on ammo, but you're actually not because if you're playing well, you're not going to be running out of ammo at all. Well, that's different in Resident Evil 0, because if you're using up more ammo than you should, you're not going to get a lot of ammo, and you need a lot of ammo for the final boss fight, because the final boss fight is a timed fight, and it's the first phase of it is a damage race, because you have to deal a certain amount of damage to the boss in order for it to work, and then the time sequence actually begins where you have to protect Rebecca. But if you don't have enough ammo for it, you're screwed. Resident Evil 0 introduces some of the laziest bosses ever and some of the worst boss fights ever, like the Bat Boss. The Bat Boss is bad in Resident Evil 0 because the mechanics completely betray you. Because you're using an auto aim system to actually fight in the bat fight, and because of the fact that the giant bat has all these little bats attacking you, it means the auto aim system is going to get screwed up so much, and it's those particular it's that particular niggle in the system that makes that fight so trash, and it's easily the worst boss fight ever in the Resident Evil series. I cannot think of any boss in the Resident Evil series worse than that. Not even Morpheus from Resident Evil 0 is as bad as that Bat Boss. Because you don't get betrayed too much by the mechanics in the final boss fight of Resident Evil Dead Aim. Because the assault rifle is so good against Morpheus in that final boss fight with him, because if you just keep maintaining a continuous fire on his head while he's stunned, he'll just be permanently stunned. It's so good. It's really good. But then that Bat Boss comes around, and it's just... But then that Bat Boss in Resident Evil 0 is around, and it's just a trashy fight. Like, 0 puts a lot of high-tier enemies in a lot of corridors. Lots and lots of corridors, like the Plague Crawlers, for instance. The Plague Crawlers, I mean, they die fast from the high-powered weapons, but...
I'll take it.
They can be annoying sometimes if you're put into a really bad spot. And I've already mentioned the hunters many times, so I'm not going to mention it again because I think I've already I've already flogged that dead horse. As Seraphim 17 would describe such a situation.
Would you look at that?
But yeah, guys, I just hope there's a Resident Evil will just be the series I remember it, and I'm dumb. I just made a mistake. I just screwed up on the last part. That was completely my fault. I messed up on that strategy. But I'm going to conclude the live stream here, folks. I think I've talked a lot about my own thoughts. Got into a nice chat with Lightning. Got into a nice chat with some of the other people here. Thank you all for watching, and you take care now.